17 points amid criticism from Kyiv and Europe that it favors Russia, while Beijing sees this as an both strategic opportunity and geopolitical risk in how the deal evolves. China's top party newspaper has urged the United States to rein in Japan, warning against any moves that could revive militarism after Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's November 7th remarks suggested that Tokyo could respond militarily to a China-Taiwan conflict. US President Donald Trump has privately urged Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi to avoid escalating tensions with China, after her remarks on November 7th triggered one of the worst diplomatic clashes with Beijing in years. The call came just after Trump's conversation with Xi Jinping, while Taiwan reiterated their stance. China has accused the US of violating the UN Charter after Washington announced a new visa policy restricting entry for Central American nationals allegedly acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. A move Secretary of State Marco Rubio said was needed to protect regional stability, while Chinese embassy in Washington has condemned the policy. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging the Trump administration to reject Myanmar's upcoming elections, calling them a sham meant to legitimize the China-backed junta amid ongoing violence and repression. Now we start with the breaking news. According to Chinese local media, at least 11 people have been killed and 2 others injured after a test train collided with another train in the city of Kunming. Emergency teams rushed to the site and authorities are now investigating the cause of the crash, which happened during a trial run on a local rail line. Now we move on to our next news. The U.S. is stepping into rising tensions between China and Japan. President Donald Trump has asked Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi to avoid further escalation with Beijing after her recent comments on Taiwan triggered the sharpest diplomatic clash in years. Takaichi has told Parliament that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could prompt Japanese military action, remarks that drew a furious response from Beijing and demands for a retraction. President Trump's request came right after his call with China's President Xi Jinping, who again stressed that Taiwan's return to China is central to Beijing's world vision, a claim firmly rejected by Taipei. While China's local media has urged Washington to rein in Japan, warning against any revival of militarism. Meanwhile, officials in Tokyo say only that Trump and Takaichi discussed U.S.-China relations. Now for this discussion, we welcome Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now,
Good to see you.
Thank you. Now, how do you see this escalating tensions between Japan and China and its U.S.'s role between them?
Well, Takaichi is not interested in further mentioning anything about Taiwan going forward because Prime Minister Takaichi merely was reactive when responded to the questions from the parliamentary floor. And she did not say that the military involvement in case of Taiwan contingency will be automatic. The Japanese legislative bill that passed the parliament under Shinzo Abe and made into law clearly stipulates when the United States and other allied forces are involved near Japan to the extent that it would pose a threat, very much a serious threat to Japan, Japan may exercise its right to defend Japan and its territory with the United States. It is not that Japan is going to defend Taiwan per se. It is Japan that is going to defend its allied powers, including the United States. That much has been well understood by the United States. So Mr. Trump may have wanted to convey what he had just heard from Xi Jinping, to Takaichi, but I understand that the phone call between Trump and Takaichi was initiated by the Trump side, and it went very much friendly.
Right. And now going forward, how should Prime Minister Takaichi balance Japan's security concerns regarding Taiwan to avoid escalating tensions with China, or should she avoid escalating tensions with China?
Because she did not say anything further beyond what the Japanese law of national security says, she cannot back down, and she's not interested in making things worse. So things will go on as they have been for some time, but it'll calm down. And in the meantime, the Chinese side is disseminating a fabricated messages that to say as if the Chinese citizens have been constantly attacked by the Japanese. This is the farthest from the truth.
And while U.S., as you shared that Takaichi and Trump's conversation was very friendly, does Washington risk being drawn too deeply into Japan-China regional conflict?
Well, the Japanese side did not say, if I may reiterate, that it would get involved in China-Taiwan military conflict. The Japanese may have to decide whether it should get involved in the conflict so long as the United States and its allied powers are involved in the conflict. So it's indirect. And that much, again, has been understood by the United States. And the Chinese do understand this because the law has been in place for years. And then they are flaring up this intentionally.
How do you think Taiwan should manage their stance now? As you know, we know that Taiwanese government is very supportive of Japanese stance, but China is merely acknowledging it.
Well, this is an important signal sent from Beijing to Taipei and people in Taiwan that if Taiwan, goes back and forth to the right, to the left, among the United States, Japan, and China, you will see lessons sent from the Chinese side. So it's part of the influence operation, in my view, aimed not only at Japanese citizens or the Japanese government, but also at the Taiwanese citizens to let them know who the master is. It is China. So that's the sort of messages that China, in my view, wants to send to the Taiwanese.
Right, and last week we know that Japan did have a missile deployment in Yonaguni Island. Looking at these reactions from China and Taiwan, what do you think this reveals about competing security priorities? And to what extent is Japan's these decisions, what do you think, is this a defensive measure or a perceived escalation?
Well, the escalation, it's common knowledge worldwide, has been conducted on the Chinese side. You're looking at the military that's grown 5 times, 6 times, 10 times as large as it used to be 10 years ago. And China is deploying the 3rd mega military aircraft carrier in the South China Sea and East China Sea. So Japan must respond. Listen, envelope has been pushed always from the Chinese side.
Right. Thank you for emphasizing that and sharing that insight, Dr. Taniguchi. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, moving on, China has accused the U.S. of violating the United Nations Charter over a new visa policy targeting Central Americans with ties to the Beijing. The U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has announced the policy, stating it would restrict visas for Central American nationals and their families who are seen as acting on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. threatening regional stability. In response, the Chinese embassy in Washington has criticized the move, saying it goes against the principles of sovereign equality and non-interference. They also argued that China's cooperation has benefited local economies. The U.S. has expressed concerns about China's growing influence in Latin America, traditionally within its sphere of influence. Yes. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi. He's a former advisor to late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, joins us live from Tokyo. Thank you very much, Dr. Taniguchi, for staying with us. Now, what do you think, what led to this decision by U.S.?
Well, if it is possible for the Japanese government to do the same, I would very much like to see the Japanese government doing the same. And it's been extremely difficult for the Japanese government or whichever government in the world to see who is and who is not the party member of the Chinese Communist Party. In Japan, one can guess there are thousands or even more of Chinese party members, and they're very much loyal to Beijing's directions. And so it's very much a grave national concern for Japan as well. The only thing is there aren't means with which Japan could do similarly with what Rubio says that the U.S. government is going to do.
And how should Central American countries navigate competing influence from United States and also China?
Well, it's up to the Central American governments. Well, there may be a lot of concerns to be thought about for the central government, but the fact remains that the U.S. government, Secretary Rubio, clearly expressed concerns to let members of the Chinese Communist Party come to the United States.
And does China's claim that the U.S. policy violates the UN Charter highlight a broader struggle over norms of sovereignty and non-interference? Or is it primarily a diplomatic reaction? What do you think?
Well, it may be a diplomatic reaction, but the reality is that influence operations and infiltrations into other countries by the Chinese Communist Party members have been going on for some time. By some time, I mean more than a decade. And now is the time for other countries, not just the United States, to have a second look at how the members of the Chinese Communist Party have been entering into their countries, including Japan, I mean.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Dr. Tomohiko Taniguchi for joining us from Japan and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Hong Kong. Chinese President Xi Jinping has expressed condolences over the deadly fire which broke out in a residential complex in Hong Kong's Tai Po district. Xi has extended his sympathies to the victims. He has called on Hong Kong to make every effort to contain the devastating fire that has claimed the lives of at least 44 people, with nearly 300 missing. Hong Kong police has arrested 3 men, including 2 company directors and an engineering consultant, on suspicion of manslaughter. In connection with the blaze, authorities believe that foam materials used during the renovations may have contributed to the fire's rapid spread. Let's listen in.
而喺較早前，大概凌晨2點，我哋分別喺大埔、牛頭角、新蒲崗拘捕咗3名本地嘅男子，涉嫌誤殺。而我哋警方有理由相信，有關工程公司嘅負責人嚴重疏忽，引致到今次嘅意外，亦都引致呢個火勢呢係迅速蔓延，一發不可收拾，導致一個重大嘅傷亡。
Hong Kong's Chief Executive John Lee has expressed his deep sorrow over the deadly fire at Wong Fak Court, which claimed the life of a firefighter, among others. Lee paid tribute to the bravery and selflessness of those who responded to the blaze and vowed that authorities would continue their efforts to rescue those still trapped and provide support to the affected families. Now Now for this discussion, we welcome Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us today. I'm glad you're safe over there. What more can you tell us about what is happening, and what do you think has led to this huge fire?
Well, this unfortunate fire has been described as the greatest disaster that has caused the most number of deaths and human suffering since the Second World War in Hong Kong. Let's not forget that we are talking about 8 residential blocks involving 2,000 different flats or families. And these blocks are separated by a space. Now, for the fire to spread so quickly, engulfing all the 8 blocks very quickly, and the fire had been burning for 20 hours, and a lot of the people were just locked. They could not escape because they were high up. And then the police, of course, conducted investigations and found suspicious fire inflammable styrofoams stuck in the air ducts on every floor of some of the blocks. Now, why this happened is still being investigated, but nevertheless, it's a huge disaster, and the whole Hong Kong government have been mobilized. Everything else have been called to a stop, including the all-important Legislative Council elections coming up in a number of weeks. And that's why President Xi has expressed these condolences, and likewise all the Hong Kong people. A number of efforts, civil society efforts have been mobilized to come to the help of the aggrieved families facing this unfortunate accident. Some of them have lost almost all the members of the families so close to Christmas. I mean, it's really the largest disaster. Let's not forget that that area concerned is north of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very dense population, 7.5 million citizens, in an area of something like 2,000 square kilometers. But then half the Hong Kong is designated country parks. That makes the area even more congested in the residential areas. And of course, the Hong Kong is divided into essentially 2 parts, separated by a beautiful harbor. I'm in the south of the island, separated by the harbor, so I'm pretty safe. But then these poor families facing such this sudden disaster deserve all our condolences.
Yes, indeed. I'm glad you're staying safe, but we do send our condolences. Andrew, what are the changes that are required? You know, I was reading about this incident, and it highlighted the bamboo scaffolding that has been used for decades in Hong Kong and also mainland China. People have pointed out, but they were silenced or ignored. Do you think these things led to this big incident?
Well, this bamboo scaffolding has been used for so long without any problem because they are quite highly suitable to Hong Kong's high rises and many of the cities. But what caused this fire is really this canopies surrounding this block of flats, and then preliminary investigations revealed that material may not comply with full fire retardant material, because when these blocks are under renovation, so they're covered by these canopies, and if these canopies materials are highly inflammable, that could cause a problem, because as I mentioned before, these blocks are separated by the space, and then all these 8 blocks are covered by canopies. But worse still, suspicious highly fire inflammable styrofoams were found stuck in the air ducts on each and every floor in these apartment buildings. It sounds suspicious to me, but that's being investigated. I think that blaming on the scaffolding is really a red herring.
Right. Thank you for bringing the focus back to the central issue. Thank you very much, Andrew K.P. Long, for joining us and sharing that insight from Hong Kong. Now we move on to our next news. India has lodged a strong protest with China after an Indian citizen was detained at Shanghai airport in what New Delhi calls an arbitrary and unhelpful action. According to reports, the traveler is a UK-based woman born in Arunachal Pradesh who was told her Indian passport was invalid, held for 18 hours, and then prevented from boarding her onward flight to Japan. China claims Arunachal Pradesh, which it calls Jiangnan, as its own territory, a claim India firmly rejects. New Delhi says the incident violates international air travel conventions and undermines efforts by both sides to rebuild trust. Beijing insists the checks were conducted according to law. This comes as the two Asian giants cautiously try to mend ties after years of tension, including a deadly 2020 border clash in the Himalayas. Now for this discussion, we welcome former Ambassador Suresh Goyal. Thank you for joining us, Ambassador.
Good morning.
Good morning. Looking at this, how does this incident impact this broader diplomatic effort that's been ongoing between India and China, trying to rebuild trust?
A difficult question, really. I thought you would ask me about whether the position taken by China is...
You can go on with that if you want. Yeah,
okay.
Sure.
No, let me answer your question first.
Okay.
It's an important issue. Look, we all know, the government of India knows that there is a difference in positions of India and China on certain boundaries or certain portions of boundaries. And Arunachal Pradesh is one of them where China has laid claim on the state, all of the states really, from 1962 onwards, in fact even before. So there is a dispute over the boundary, and because of this dispute, what China has been doing is that the passports issued with a domicile as Arunachal Pradesh, Indian passports issued, they don't accept them. That is true. But then what happens is that we have taken this up and we have found a modus operandi to allow people from Arunachal Pradesh to travel to China for various kinds of work. Now, what happens in this case is that he was traveling from Japan or one country to the other, really, I forget the other one, and he was just transiting through Shanghai. Normally, these kind of immigration checks, custom checks do not take place when you are in transit. They are allowed to transit, and some countries say that up to 24 hours there is no problem. Beyond 24 hours, you need to clear the immigration to be able to enter China. In this case, China itself has basically gone against its own rules, where for 24 hours, a person can pass through the airport without any difficulty, without any issues with the passport, etc., etc. So for various reasons, China has, on its own, defied or actually negated its own rule. Now, the issue really is that China, because of the difference between India and China on the boundary, has taken this position. What does India do? I think diplomatically, we need to be prepared to see that China is not going to relent on these issues, even if there is an express keenness to develop relations in economic areas, trade, etc., cultural areas. The willingness to let it go on, percolate to the issues where they have their own views may be difficult. So we need to do two things, really speaking. One, that we should not think that just if the relations between India and China improve in the areas of trade, economics, etc., but there is an equal willingness on both sides to do so, it is not going to change the views or the perceptions of China on critical issues like boundary. We have to be prepared to that even after improvement of relations, differences on the boundary can cause problems in future. That is number one. And number two, while developing relations in silos, the only way we can actually let Chinese know how it actually is a problem is basically a reciprocal action. Reciprocity in diplomatic areas, in political areas is well known. And I think they will know that yes, there are issues on our sides also, and that we can actually use those issues also, which can create problem for their citizens, so that they know how bad it is.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that and giving 3 points on how India can react to this. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Ambassador Suresh Goyal for sharing that insight from New Delhi. Now we have another breaking news. 2 National Guard members are in a critical condition after they were shot in Washington, D.C., as per reports. The suspect is an Afghan national, Rahmanullah Lakhanwal, who entered the U.S. in 2021. U.S. President Trump, while giving information on the shooting, has said that the suspect was also shot during the incident and taken to hospital. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth says Trump has asked him to send 500 additional National Guard troops to Washington, D.C. after this attack. Now we move on back to Asia. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging Donald Trump's administration to reject Myanmar's elections next month, calling it a sham. This comes days after the administration cited the country's electoral progress as grounds to remove legal protections for Myanmar nationals in the U.S. The lawmakers warned that the December 28th elections are designed to manufacture legitimacy for the China-backed junta after its 2021 coup and ongoing campaign of violence against the Burmese people. The junta has struggled to control territory in the years since, even with China and Russia's military and political support. Lawmakers have also said that the Myanmar citizens have resisted the junta's rule, which dissolved political parties in 2023 and persecuted state officials previously elected in 2020, at great risk of death, imprisonment, and torture. And that's a wrap on the China Report. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. As the conundrum over Russia-Ukraine peace deal grows, Ukraine hints at hope, says common understanding reached with United States on peace deal aimed at ending the war with Russia. U.S. President Donald Trump has stated that the proposal for Ukraine peace deal has been fine-tuned with collaboration of both Russia and Ukraine, and U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will be meeting Russian President Vladimir Putin next week. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has stated that President Trump has hinted that he may hold up for two-person in-person meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping next year, marking an unprecedented level of high-level meeting between US and China. This comes as China agrees to buy at least 87.5 million metric tons of US grain over the next 3.5 years. China has warned it will crush all foreign interference over Taiwan after Japan announced plans to deploy missiles near the island, as Beijing reasserted its claim over Taiwan and criticized Japan's move. Taiwan has maintained that only Taiwan can decide the island's future. This comes as Taiwan announces that they are to boost their defense spending to increase Taiwan's 2026 defense spending to 3.32% of the GDP, with Taiwanese President Lai declaring that the move aims to deter Beijing. As Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te officially announced a $40 billion supplementary defense budget to boost significant new U.S. arms purchases as China intensifies pressure and Washington urges Taipei to spend more, Lai has declared that the move aims to deter Beijing while reaffirming his commitment to democracy, dialogue, and peace. The death toll from the Thailand floods have now risen to 18 people. Over hundreds of patients are reportedly stuck in the hospitals as the conditions worsen in the region. The armed forces continue to rescue operations in parts of Thailand. China has completed its first ever emergency space launch, sending the Shenzhou 22 with 600 kilograms of supplies to the Tiangong station to replace damaged return craft after Shenzhou 20 was found to have cracks allegedly caused by space debris. The new vessel marks a critical step in maintaining crew safety ahead of their expected return. Now we start with Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's ready to move forward on a US-backed framework to end the war with Russia and to address the most sensitive issues directly with the US President Donald Trump, along with Europe at the table. But deep gaps remain. Kyiv fears being pressured into accepting a deal that could force territorial concessions to Moscow. Zelensky has urged European leaders to help shape the long-term reassurance force for Ukraine, saying security decisions must include the countries they affect. Let's in fact listen into what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has shared.
Розраховую на подальшу активну співпрацю з американською стороною та з президентом Трампом. Багато залежить від Америки, бо саме на американську силу в Росії зважають найбільше. Я дякую всім, хто з Україною. Я дякую всім, хто допомагає. І важливо зараз тримати внутрішню силу так, як ми всі хочемо, щоб наша сила в дипломатії спрацювала.
Meanwhile, President Trump has said that only a few disagreements are left. He's sending U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff to meet separately with President Putin in Moscow and Ukrainian officials, but he has backed away from Thursday's deadline. Let's in fact listen into what U.S. President Donald Trump has shared.
Well, I don't have a deadline. You know what the deadline for me is? When it's over. And I think everybody's tired of fighting at this moment. They're losing too many people. We're having good, I don't know, he would like to come, but I think we should get a deal done first. We're having good talks. We started with Russia. We're having some talks with Russia. Ukraine is doing well. I think they're pretty happy about it. They'd like to see it end. And we won't know for a little while, but we're making progress.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Professor Georgi Tolaraya. He's a professor at Russia Academy of Science, who joins us live from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Professor, now looking at this, what are the risks and benefits for Ukraine in engaging with US-backed peace framework if it fears being pressured into territorial concessions to Russia? Is this a legitimate fear, and do you think could it be pressured to give up territory?
As a former practicing diplomat, I would say that it's really very hard to make conclusion of what's going on in the course of negotiations. there are many positions which are interconnected, and in some places you make concessions to get your point in more important ones. So this is a very complicated process. And when outsiders look at it, most likely you won't understand much. But from what I see in general, from what the Europeans are trying to do, is that they want to turn the plan into something, Trump's plan into something that would be not acceptable to Russia. Because for Russia, generally speaking, the difference is between as in chess, between the win, the victory, and the draw. We cannot speak about Russia's defeat, of course, but what the Europeans are trying to do to make it a draw. That there's no victory for anybody. But that's unacceptable for Russia. There's no territorial concessions from Ukraine. This is a Russian territory declared by Russia, so it will be Russian anyway. And also some other points of this plan, I don't know how they look like in reality and what we'll be talking about, but something really unacceptable. For example, for me personally, I wouldn't even discuss the issue of Russian frozen assets. It's a robbery. We cannot recognize a robbery, We cannot recognize something which is taken by force and to legalize it as something that can be negotiated. They should be returned, full stop. This is my opinion. I don't know what the negotiators are thinking, but so far I cannot say how this whole negotiation process will wind up, how it will end. I'm not very optimistic, I'm not over pessimistic, but we have to wait and see. And in the meantime, Russia will continue its victorious advance on the front.
Right. And how do you think this affects the peace process, ongoing peace process between Russia, Ukraine, and US, while Ukraine keeps attacking Russia and also Russia also keeps attacking Ukraine? The escalating situation in the front line, do you think it affects the peace process?
Yeah, of course. Ukraine keeps on attacking. The day before yesterday, I think there were 250 drones shut down, which were shut down over Russia, including the one which attacked Moscow, about a dozen, about 10 of them. And last night there was also several dozen drones attacking, and Russia is advancing on the battlefield. This is very gruesome, and this is very sad. But that will keep on going on until a fair peace deal is achieved.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Professor Georgi Toleraya for sharing that. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic now. Russia has launched a major overnight drone attack on the southeastern Ukrainian city of Zaporizhia. Regional Governor Ivan Fedorov has said that the strike set off multiple fires, injured 12 people, and caused widespread damage across the city. Shops were destroyed, 7 apartment buildings were hit, and cars were left smashed in the streets. Rescue teams, firefighters, and police, as well as medical crews, are working at more than a dozen locations. Meanwhile, Russian-installed authorities say Ukrainian forces struck power infrastructure in areas held by Moscow, cutting electricity to about 40,000 customers. Now we move on to our next news. The coalition of the willing, comprising key European leaders, has expressed strong support for US President Donald Trump's efforts to bring an end to the ongoing war in Ukraine and Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has emphasized that any peace solution must fully involve Ukraine and uphold the principle that borders should not be changed by force. In a related development, Prime Minister Starmer has announced that the UK is prepared to move forward with the European Union on a plan to immobilize Russian assets. Starmer has stated that freezing Russian assets is the best way to pressure President Vladimir Putin to negotiate for peace, signaling that the UK is committed to supporting Ukraine both in war and in potential peace talks. Let's listen in.
We, the UK, are ready to move with the EU on providing financial support based on the value of the immobilised assets. This is the best way to show Putin he should negotiate, rather than trying to outweight us. And it's the best way for us to be ready to support Ukraine in war or in peace. So even as we work towards peace, and we are, there can be no letting up of support to keep Ukraine in the fight. And that requires urgent solutions on things like financing and capability. And I know on financing, Ursula and Antonio's teams are working pretty well around the clock now. We're really thankful to them for everything they're putting in on this. And I know that EU leaders are looking at this in the next few weeks.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Georgi Toloraya from Moscow. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, how do you see the coalition of the willing stance of, everything about Ukraine should include Ukraine, but everything about Russia and Ukraine doesn't have to include Russia in the talks? How do you see their view affecting the talks? Does it strengthen or complicate President Trump's efforts to negotiate an end to the war? The coalition of the willing, comprising key European leaders, has expressed strong support for U.S. President Donald Trump's efforts to bring an end to the war in Ukraine and Russia. French President Emmanuel Macron, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has emphasized that any peace solution must fully involve Ukraine and uphold the principle that borders should not be changed by force. In a related development, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced that the UK is prepared to move forward with the European Union on a plan to immobilize Russian assets. Starmer has stated that freezing Russian assets is the best way to pressure President Vladimir Putin to negotiate for peace, signaling that the UK is committed to supporting Ukraine both in war and in potential peace talks. Now we move on to our next news. We are moving on to Asia. Taiwan's president is warning that China is intensifying its military, political, and information pressure on the island. The president has accused Beijing of accelerating preparations to seize Taiwan by force and trying to redefine democratic Taiwan as China's Taiwan. He has said that China is stepping up military drills, gray zone harassments, and influence operations aimed at undermining Taiwan's autonomy. The president has also warned that threats to the border Indo-Pacific are rising as Taiwan faces increasing attempts at infiltration and coercion. His remarks come amid a steady rise in Chinese military activity around the island, along with ongoing cyber disinformation and political influence campaigns documented by Taiwan's security agencies. Taiwan says it will continue strengthening its defense posture and deepening partnerships with like-minded democracies to maintain stability. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Andrew K.P. Long. He's an independent China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, Andrew, how do you think China sees Taiwan increasingly or boosting up their defense and buying more arms from U.S.?
Well, nothing much has changed in the dynamics. First of all, Taiwan is, of course, not a nation recognized by the United Nations, nor by the United States, or by virtually all the countries across the group. Since the President Nixon's visit to mainland to China back in the times of Chairman Mao, Taiwan has been recognized as a nation, replaced by the People's Republic of China as representing the whole of China, and hence the One China policy consistently adopted by the United States. Now, the One China policy is supported by three important legislation or documents. The first one is the China Relations Act, which enables the United States to continue to supply arms to Taiwan to defend itself. So this has been going on for a long, long time. And also in recent years, the United States want to turn Taiwan into a military porcupine. In other words, bristling with armament so as to deter any military solution, which of course the United States opposes. Now this has not been changed. Secondly, it's also been defined by the so-called 3 communique and this 6 assurances given by President Reagan. All these 2 other documents amount to is that the United States takes no position on the future of Taiwan, and it should be left on to the Taiwan people themselves. It opposes the solution of the Taiwan question through military means, and supports the evolution through peaceful means. And secondly, it also affirms the United States is taking no position or assuming no role for the mediation. So I think that these documents still carry weight and is now being followed. Now, as far as Taiwan is concerned, of course, this through the various elections, you have now a pro-independence or separatist leader. He has always been known as a separatist, and hence it rattles Beijing's relationship no end. Now, as far as Beijing is concerned, the unification remains a long-term strategy enshrined in the China Dream and also in China's constitution. How is that going to be achieved? Because most Taiwanese people do not support unification, nor do they dare to declare independence, because that would trigger the Anti-Succession Act on the mainland. The Anti-Succession Act was enacted by Beijing decades ago to forestall the possibility of any de jure declaration of independence. So most Taiwanese people just want to carry on with the status quo, but unfortunately, that cannot be allowed continue to drift because President Xi did make it quite clear that the latest deadline for unification will be 2049, which is the 100th anniversary of the People's founding of People's Republic of China. Now, how is this going to be achieved? Through 3 strategies, interrelated strategies. The first one is military deterrence against any de jure declaration of independence. Secondly, through diplomatic and pressure and also economic pressure, because the Taiwan economy is has been dependent on the Chinese mainland economy, especially supplying chains. Thirdly, through people-to-people exchanges, the people on both sides are increasingly interacting with one another, tourism, investment, and also job opportunities for young people in Taiwan, including even film directors or actresses from Taiwan featuring in China's films. And so the momentum is now gathering pace. And of course, as Taiwan is being increasingly armed to the teeth, and so China's getting prepared to exercise more deterrence against any separatist movement. Now, there is a big confusion and big red herring, total misunderstanding in the West, as if Beijing is going to invade Taiwan by 2027. Now, the date was mentioned by President Xi, but only to get the People's Liberation Army to be fully prepared to be able to mount a military deterrence against any separatist movement. 2027 is needed so that Beijing would develop an unbeatable force by that time. But it's only a contingency. It's not, repeat, not a date to take military action, because the preference is still for peaceful unification based on the 3 related strategies which I've outlined.
Right. Thank you for outlining all that, Andrew. And Andrew, can you tell us why does this, as you know, you mentioned Taiwanese people and China mainland people's engagement is gaining momentum, and the three ways you mentioned that things could happen. Now, why do you think President Lai so firmly rejects Beijing's one country, two systems stance? And is he popular, or is his stance popular in Taiwan? How long do you think he can carry on this?
Well, of course, at the beginning, Beijing was using the Hong Kong Macau example of one country, two systems, but most Taiwan people reject this formula, saying that's not good enough. But I think that Beijing is leaving the options open. If the Taiwanese would like to proceed with negotiation for the unification, I'm sure that the Beijing would find a way to make the final package even more favorable compared with Hong Kong and Macau, provided that the one country principle is upheld. And of course, there will be exercise of sovereignty. I don't think that Taiwan would be allowed to have a separate army, for example. But apart from that, there could be political parties on Taiwan, free and fair elections, and Taiwan able to participate in the international organizations, as in the case of Hong Kong, for example, but using the China bracket Taiwan, as in the case of Hong Kong and Macau, China, Hong Kong, and of course Hong Kong has its own separate flag, but along with the Chinese flag, with the national flag. So all these can be discussed. At the end, the main thing is unifying Taiwan into one country, and also enabling the Taiwan people to live a normal and prosperous life.
Right, and Andrea, long ago when I went to Taiwan, I remember when entering Taiwan, I had to, as a Japanese passport holder, I had to sign a waiver saying that I will abide by Chinese law when staying in Taiwan. So since when is this kind of system going on?
Well, I'm not familiar with what you said with the Japanese passport. That was a different thing, because there was an incident recently when a Japanese national using some other passport, but nothing to do with Japan, because Taiwan is a separate territory. It's always belonged to China, dating back to the Ming Dynasty in 1300s. And even before, because at that time during the Ming Dynasty, they were already a Beijing administration together with a general station in Taiwan. So it's nothing to do with Japan at all. And of course, Japan invaded Taiwan at the beginning of the Second World War and occupied Taiwan as a colony. Until Japan was defeated. After Japan was defeated, the Allied forces required Japan to return all its occupied territory to China. But at that time, the Kuomintang, which was under General Chiang Kai-shek, was in Taiwan because it was defeated in the civil war in China by the People's by the Communist Party, and so it retreated to Taiwan. And then at that time, immediately after the end of the Second World War, the Allied forces handed over Taiwan to the Chiang Kai-shek, the Kuomintang administration in Taiwan. But then afterwards, President Nixon visited Chairman Mao because it wanted to bring China on the side of the United States during this Cold War with the former USSR. And when the USSR was at loggerheads with the former, at the time with Chairman Mao. And so President Nixon visited Beijing and to bring China on the side of the United States and help China to enter into the World Trade Organization with the hope that China would become more like the United States and would be absorbed into American sphere of influence. But what happened afterwards is not what the United States has expected. China, of course, has grown its economy, become stronger, but it's not being absorbed in the United States, and is now eating Americans' lunch. Rather than producing Nike shoes and T-shirts, it's now producing high-tech products and challenging Americans' dominance, even Americans' military. And so the United States is doubling down on confronting China. But as far as the Taiwan policy is concerned, the United States still maintain the One China policy, still adhere to the Taiwan Relations Act and the and the communique, and as well as the 6 assurances, which, as I outlined, the United States takes no position on the future of Taiwan, supports peaceful negotiations, opposes military solution, and assumes no role in a mediation. So it all amounts to that three different dynamics through military deterrence, economic pressure, diplomatic pressure, as well as people-to-people exchanges. This would lead to increasing momentum towards negotiation for a peaceful solution.
Hopefully, yes. Thank you very much, Andrew, for sharing that history and all the depth on this topic. With that, I would like to thank Andrew K.P. Long for joining us today and sharing that insight from Hong Kong. Now we move on to our next news. In Brazil, former President Jair Bolsonaro has been ordered to begin serving a 27-year prison sentence for his role in plotting a coup following his defeat in the 2022 presidential election. The Brazilian Supreme Court's decision comes after Bolsonaro was found guilty of attempting to subvert the democratic process. Bolsonaro had been under house arrest but was moved to the federal police headquarters in Brasilia after tampering with his ankle monitor. The court's ruling is final despite appeals from Bolsonaro's defense team. Bolsonaro, who has been barred from holding public office, continues to assert his intentions to run for president again in 2026, though his health and political viability are now under increasing scrutiny. His sons had said that Bolsonaro's persecution was psychological torture. Now we move on to Oceania. 2 bodies of 2 climbers, including one from the United States, have been recovered after the pair fell into their deaths from New Zealand's highest mountain during a summit attempt. The men were part of a group of 4, 2 New Zealanders-based guides and 2 clients climbing Mount Cook or Aoraki. They have fell from a ridge onto the west side of the mountain late on Monday. Police were notified at around 11:20 p.m. local time, and a search and rescue team located 2 members of the group uninjured in the early hours of Tuesday. Helicopters continued to search through the night and located the bodies of the 2 missing climbers and recovered their bodies around midday. Over the past century, dozens of climbers have died on this mountain, where rock falls are common and avalanches often occur at higher altitudes. Now we move on to Indonesia. At least 8 people have been killed and more than 2,000 residents have been displaced after severe flooding swept through the Sibolga region of North Sumatra in Indonesia. Officials say heavy overnight rains triggered flash floods and landslides, inundating homes and cutting off several communities. Authorities say the number of evacuees could rise as teams continue to assess the damage. With more heavy rain forecast for the region, Indonesia's Search and Rescue Agency is urging people to avoid low-lying and flood-prone areas. Emergency crews remain on high alert as conditions continue to deteriorate. And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. A massive fire has erupted in a Hong Kong complex apartment. So far, the fire has claimed at least 44 lives and has left nearly 300 missing. The Hong Kong police has arrested 3 construction company officials. Two National Guard soldiers were shot in U.S. and critically wounded near White House in what U.S. is calling a targeted attack. The suspect in the shooting has been identified as Rahmanullah, who is reportedly an Afghan national. Following the DC shooting, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that his administration would re-examine all Afghans who have entered the United States during Biden's term. Trump also denounces the shooting as a terror attack and an act of evil. Amid this escalating rift between Japan and China, U.S. President Donald Trump has urged Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi to avoid further escalation as per reports. This comes as U.S. aims to keep trade truce with China. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced that more than $34 billion in tax rises. This is on top of the £40 billion she raised last year. As a result, a large hit of growth of living standards is expected. Eleven people have reportedly lost their lives in a deadly train collision in China's southern province on Yunnan. At least 2 people have been injured in the collision. Floods and landslides brought about by torrential rain in Indonesia's North Sumatra province kills at least 28 people, with rescue efforts hampered by what an official described as a total cut-off of roads and communications. A bipartisan group of U.S. lawmakers is urging the Trump administration to reject Myanmar's upcoming elections, calling them a sham meant to legitimize the China-backed junta amid ongoing violence and repression. Now for this hour, we start with U.S. U.S. President Donald Trump has called for a thorough review of Afghan immigrants who entered the United States during the Biden administration. This follows the shooting of 2 National Guard members in Washington, D.C., which Trump has described as an act of terror. Let's listen into what he has said.
Animal who perpetrated this atrocity pays the steepest possible price. I can report tonight that based on the best available information, the Department of Homeland Security is confident that the suspect in custody is a foreigner who entered our country from Afghanistan, a hellhole on earth. He was flown in by the Biden administration in September 2021 on those infamous flights that everybody was talking about, by people who shouldn't even be in our country. We must now re-examine every single alien who has entered our country from Afghanistan under Biden, and we must take all necessary measures to ensure the removal of any alien from any country who does not belong here or add benefit to our country. If they can't love our country, we don't want them.
In response to the shooting, the U.S. government will deploy an additional 500 troops to Washington, D.C. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has emphasized that the move aims to ensure the safety and security of the capital, reinforcing the resolve to maintain safety in the city. Let's listen in.
That will only stiffen our resolve. We will never back down. We will secure our capital. We will secure our cities. In fact, this happened just steps away from the White House. It will not stand. And that's why President Trump has asked me, and I will ask the Secretary of the Army, to the National Guard, to add 500 additional troops, National Guardsmen, to Washington, D.C. This will only stiffen our resolve to ensure that we make Washington, D.C. safe.
While FBI Director Kash Patel has confirmed that the two troops were attacked in a horrendous act of violence, but clarified that earlier reports mistakenly stated they had died. Let's listen into what he has said.
D.C., where two of our brave members of the National Guard and the Department of War were brazenly attacked in a horrendous act of violence. They were shot. They're in critical condition.
Now for this discussion, we welcome Matthew Vadam. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Matthew, for joining us again. Good to see you.
Hi.
Hi.
Sure.
Thank you. Matthew, what more can you tell us about this ongoing and unfolding incident in Washington?
Well, at somewhere around 2 o'clock this afternoon, a man walked up to a male and a female National Guardsman from West Virginia and shot them. And initially, there were reports that the two National Guardsmen from West Virginia had died, but those reports were false and were quickly retracted. And right now, the authorities are trying to figure out the motive for the attack. But since the person is from Afghanistan and was admitted to the United States in 2021 under the Biden administration as part of a welcome program for Afghan people from Afghanistan, the suspicion is that this person was committing an act of jihad. In other words, was a Muslim, committed an act of Muslim Islamic terrorism. And, you know, we don't know if that's true yet, but that's a logical enough assumption considering that the person came from Afghanistan. There was a report, I'm not sure if it was corroborated, that the man shouted Allahu Akbar before he opened fire on the two soldiers, which, you know, is often what precedes an Islamic terrorist attack, as people in India well know.
Right.
They shout, "God is the greatest," and then they kill people, and God is the greatest, Allahu Akbar, in Arabic, that is, and so that is the suspicion. I don't know if it's true, but it is certainly logical enough that, you know, why, unless the man is just a crazy person and he decided he wanted to shoot two National Guardsmen. But, you know, a National Guardsman is a symbol of the authority of the government, and so would be a logical enough person to attack if you are an Islamic terrorist. So we'll have to wait as the investigation unfolds to find out what actually happens, if that person's motivation can be determined. He was reportedly about, you know, 30 years old, not an old man, and he was apparently shot in the encounter, but has survived. I don't think that he is in critical condition, I'm not certain, but I know that the two National Guardsmen, the two soldiers from West Virginia, are reportedly in hospital in critical condition. And so everyone is hoping that they survive. President Trump has reacted very strongly to it and said that the perpetrator of the attack is going to you know, be punished for carrying it out. And as a result, within hours, U.S. policy towards nationals of Afghanistan was quickly changed, and they have suspended all immigration applications to, including asylum applications from Afghan nationals to the United States. And I wouldn't be surprised if more changes are made. Afghanistan nationals who were admitted to the United States under the 2021 program, I believe that was under an immigration program called parole. They were granted entry into the United States without any conditions, but also without any expectations that they would be given permanent resident status or citizenship in the United States. I don't believe it's what you call TPS, temporary protected status, which is granted to people from certain countries that are experiencing, civil disorder or, earthquakes or fires or crime waves or what have you. President Trump has been revoking the temporary protected status of nationals of certain countries, and I wouldn't be surprised if he takes away whatever status Afghan nationals have as a result of this attack. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens.
Right. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Matthew Adams for sharing that insight from U.S. Of course, that it is, of course, the Allahu Akbar part we are not sure about yet, and there is suspicion of radicalization of Islam. Thank you very much. Moving on to Asia, the president of Taiwan has sent condolences to Hong Kong following the deadly fire in the Taipo district. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping has also expressed his condolences over the tragedy, which claimed at least 44 lives, with nearly 300 people still missing. She has called on Hong Kong authorities to make every effort to contain the blaze and minimize further casualties. Hong Kong police have arrested 3 men in connection with the fire, suspecting that foam materials used during renovations may have contributed to the fire's rapid spread. Hong Kong's chief executive, John Lee, has expressed deep sorrow over the tragedy, paying tribute to the firefighter who lost his life, as well as to the others who bravely responded. Lee has vowed that efforts would continue to rescue those still trapped and provide support to the affected families. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Colin Chong-Yu Keat. He's an Foreign Affairs Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from University of Malaya from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us again. Good to see you. Thank you. Now looking at this, what political implications or might arise from the arrests of these company directors? And how do such accountability measures influence public trust in governance and regulation in Hong Kong now?
Yeah, we have seen how the level of public anger and of course the call for greater accountability and reforms in terms of safety measures. We have seen how this blaze is now the biggest, the worst in Hong Kong's history, and of course it came just days before the territory's legislative elections scheduled in early next month. So this has raised pressure on the administration, on John Lee's administration, for competence, for the level of preparedness, and the complacency in terms of the safeguarding citizens' lives. We have seen how the materials being used and the history of using bamboo scaffolding have also contributed to this deadly blaze, and the level of shock, public anger have also mounted, and of course this will also have a greater impact on the state of the local elections, and of course also there have been calls from experts and residents as well as the public for an end to this long-held practice of these flammable materials being used, and of course the call for stricter building and renovation regulations. And of course this has been a timely wake-up call to the government, to the local administration, and of course the pressure now is on John Lee's administration to launch a full-scale criminal investigation and safety investigation to the fire. But this, for the time being, I will argue that we will not be enough or sufficient to to satisfy the public demand or the public call for accountability. And critics have long argued that there has to be a swift policy change in terms of not only cosmetic changes, but a deep reforms in terms of public safety and the competency of the public officials in ensuring that this will not happen again in the future.
Yes. With that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. Now, we stay in this news. Meanwhile, residents of Hong Kong have described the scene as heart-wrenching and shocking as families search for loved ones and crews continue rescue efforts. Local volunteers have opened an emergency shelter to support displaced residents, offering food, blankets, and a place to rest. One resident summed up the grief felt across the community, saying it's truly heartbreaking. Let's listen into what some of the residents have shared.
其實我真係都覺得幾恐怖嘅，真係你其實我應該算係睇住佢從一棟變成2棟，之後而家好似3棟，即係而家好似就都4棟啦。咁即係其實真係幾恐怖下嘅。
個心情係好唔舒服，係好揦住，即係好似即係如果嗰啲網係防火嘅話，就唔會發生呢個情。
你諗下一個屋企冇咗喎，燒毀喎，換轉邊個都心急啦，係咪啊？感同身受啦，真係好難受㗎。其實係個屋企啊咁樣燒咗佢喎，真係形容唔到咯。我諗香港可能開埠以嚟都未試過呢啲咁嘅火喎，呢一下子咁多棟都燒都着晒喎，一下咁樣2棟、3棟、4棟咁全部着晒喎，係咪啊？都好震驚啊！
無論係細節上面啊，即係可能係一啲市民安置啦，或者係究竟係原因係咩咧？我諗可能大家最想知係原因係咩咯，即係呢啲我覺得傷痛減少啲咯。係啊，即係解釋得好啲咯，係啊，即係唔好草草了事，因為始終呢度牽涉嘅唔係1、2個單位咁簡單，係一條村，差唔多一條村咁樣。
Now we move on to our next news. Tensions are rising between Washington and Pretoria. U.S. President Donald Trump has said that South Africa will not be invited to next year's G20 summit in Miami. His announcement comes after the United States boycotted last week's G20 leaders meeting in Johannesburg. Trump has accused South Africa of weaponizing its G20 presidency and refusing to hand over leadership at the summit's closing ceremony. He has said that decision led him to block South Africa from the 2026 guest list. Trump has also repeated claims of persecution of white South Africans, allegations widely dismissed by experts and human rights groups. However, South Africa's presidency has not yet commented on this issue. Now we welcome back Professor Collins Cho-Yu Keat. He is Foreign Affairs, Security and Strategy Analyst, joins us live from Kuala Lumpur. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at this, thank you. How might the U.S. decision to exclude South Africa from the next G20 summit affect the upcoming G20 and also the global perceptions of neutrality of G20, especially when political narratives such as claims of persecution that are rejected by experts shape such international relations?
Well, this is a tit-for-tat move. We have seen how the U.S. has boycotted the summit in Johannesburg this year. And of course, accusing the South Africa of refusing to hand over the hosting protocol to the U.S. During the summit. So all this has also contributed to this sense of tension between both countries. And of course, South Africa has been the voice of the global South. And of course, Trump being Trump, nations have been well aware of the need to expect this kind of responses from Trump. And the implications for global diplomacy, international order will not be, as much as, to be pervasive. We have seen how these strained U.S.-South Africa relations, are now being confined, largely to these two nations. And of course, also the G20 has long been premised on the substance of inclusion and consensus. So this exclusion of South Africa for next year's summit in Florida, of course, is based on the decision and in the policy of Trump and Washington, but it might necessarily undermine the credibility of or the intent of other G20 nations to work alongside with the U.S. of course, they are well aware of the repercussions if they do not, position themselves in alignment with the greater interests of the US and of, the G20 platform as a whole. So I don't see that to be, affecting the credibility or the impact of G20 as a whole. And the other nations are very much in need of, the impact of Trump's policies on G20, and that this is, an enclosed kind of, tension and issue. But of course, there will be some backlash against perceived, U.S. unilateral move to sidestep South Africa. But other nations would have expected that, and this is also being seen as a warning sign, as a warning by Trump that other nations will need to treat the U.S. with respect, and of course also the international order and the impact and influence of G20 will only be enhanced and amplified by the inclusion or by the impact and direct involvement of the US under Trump. So I think this is a core message being sent by Trump that the G20 will not go forward without the proper and direct support from the US, as with the case of also G7 and as well as the UN platform as a whole. So I think it's a very strategic and move by Trump in this measure.
Right, and what do you think, to what extent should individual member states, even if it's a major country like US, be allowed to interpret or deviate from established G20 protocols?
Well, we have seen, it is inevitable for, other nations, whether they are in G20 or the UN or G7, to not disregard the important aspect of the support and the impact of Trump's policies on these measures. So regardless of the internal mechanisms or norms of institutions, including the G20, the direct deterrence effect, the direct economic measures and impact from Trump's policies will pervade, will supersede the importance of the returns or the positive impact from these institutions, including the G20. So I think this has been the realization being realized by not only the G20 members, but also the G7 members, also the European members, as well as ASEAN members. So we have seen how this projection and the trend of nations getting more compelled to align deeper with U.S. interests, especially under the worldview of Trump, the lenses of Trump in terms of global policies, have been one of the core main essence of the moves by other nations now. So I don't see that other G20 states will protest vehemently or to strongly protest against Trump's move to exclude South Africa, because they know themselves well that this move will invite further repercussions, and that it will not serve the greater interests of that particular individual nation as well as the interests of G20 as a whole. So yes, this new model of norms have now been dictated by Trump. I think it is good for Washington to double down on the need for the US also to play a greater role in terms of also providing these needed economic and security measures for all G20 nations as well as for other nations in other institutions.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for highlighting that. And with that, I would like to thank Professor Collins for joining us today from Kuala Lumpur and sharing that insight. Now we move on to UK. British Finance Minister Rachel Reeves has announced a big tax-raising budget that will take more money from workers' people saving for a pension and investors to give herself a greater room to meet her deficit reduction targets. Britain's fiscal watchdog cut its forecasts for economic growth for the coming years as a setback for struggling Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who promised voters last year that he would speed up the economy. Meanwhile, the Office for the Budget Responsibility, OBR, has said that the government will now have more than double its previous buffer for meeting these fiscal targets, something which is closely watched by investors assessing Britain's borrowing risks. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Matthew Adam. He's an American journalist and author, joins us live from Washington. Thank you very much, Matthew, for staying with us. Now, we move on to our next news now. Now moving on to Asia, a rare tropical A rare tropical cyclone blew across Indonesia's Sumatra Island, inundating the nearby Malacca Strait and causing floods and landslides. At least 28 people have been killed in the region so far. Reports suggest that more than 10 people are still missing following the disaster. An official has said that rescue efforts have been hampered as there are a total cut-off of roads and communications. Up to 8,000 people across North Sumatra has been evacuated, with aid and logistics now being distributed via helicopter as per reports. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.